I parked near her office before noon. She had mentioned a team lunch, but I saw her walking out with Mark, a coworker she often mentioned casually. They crossed the street together, laughing, and got into his gray sedan. I started my car and followed at a steady distance, keeping one vehicle between us. They drove 10 minutes toward the industrial district, where a short-stay business hotel sat behind a gas station. I watched them park, walk in side by side, and disappear through the glass doors without hesitation. The time was 12:17 p.m. I noted the license plate, the make of the car, and the building's security camera position near the entrance. I didn't confront anyone or call her. Instead, I stayed until 1:46 p.m. when they came out, still talking, both adjusting their clothes slightly before getting into the car again. I took a few photos from my dashboard, making sure the timestamps were visible. Then I drove away, slowly, letting the facts build their own case. That night, she came home at her usual time, around 6:30. She dropped her bag on the counter and mentioned that lunch had run long. Her phone lit up twice while she was cooking. Each time she flipped it over quickly. I didn't say anything. Instead, I checked her car's trip meter later that night. It showed an extra 11 miles compared to the direct route between her office and home. I made a note in my phone and reset the counter. I wanted a baseline for the next day. The following afternoon, the same pattern appeared. She left for work at 8, texted me around 11 about a crazy morning, and mentioned grabbing a sandwich near the office. I checked her location through our shared phone plan at 12:18 p.m. It pinged near the same industrial district. The marker stayed there until nearly 2. When she got home, she was cheerful, chatting about office deadlines. I stayed quiet and washed dishes while she scrolled through her phone. By the end of the week, I had 3 identical records. Same location window, same travel distance, same absence pattern. I printed a small map with timestamps and cross-referenced it against her text messages. Her replies during that period were short, delayed, and never matched her claimed lunch spots. On Friday evening, while she was in the shower, I checked her purse. The hotel's point-of-sale receipt was folded with her credit card slip. It showed a purchase for room service lunch and the same business name I'd seen on the signboard earlier. The date and time aligned perfectly with one of my logs. I sat at the dining table and reviewed everything again. No emotion, no speculation, just events, times, and evidence. She came out of the bathroom, smiling, asking if I wanted to order dinner. I said sure, and we ordered Chinese. While waiting, I sent myself an email attaching the photos, maps, and receipts, time-stamped and stored safely. That night, I slept without saying a word. The facts were enough to start. The next, Monday, I left home earlier than usual. She thought I had a client meeting across town. I parked 2 blocks from her office, waited until noon, and watched the building entrance. At 12:06, she stepped out wearing the same navy coat from last week. 5 minutes later, Mark joined her. He was carrying his laptop bag and car keys. They crossed to the same gray sedan, unaware of me behind tinted glass. I watched them drive the same route toward the industrial area. The pattern repeated exactly, minute for minute. I took note of the entry time again, 12:19, and exit at 1:45. Nothing changed, not even their pace walking back to the car. Predictable behavior was easier to document than anything else. That evening, while she showered, I opened her laptop. The screen showed her work calendar, which synced automatically from her company's Outlook account. I noticed a recurring block titled Vendor Coordination between 12 and 2 p.m. every Tuesday and Thursday. There was no location listed, just the same private label. I checked her email. The thread was empty, except one recurring reminder set by her and marked, "Do not delete." I copied the appointment details and sent them to my backup email account. Then I returned everything exactly as it was. 2 days later, I placed a small GPS tracker under her rear bumper. It synced to my phone and refreshed every 3 minutes. When lunch hours came, it showed the same address again. Exact coordinates matched my earlier notes. I watched from a distance once more, seeing her enter with Mark at the hotel lobby. Their routine was precise, almost mechanical. When they returned to the office later, she sent me a text. "Crazy day, no break." I stared at the message and saved a screenshot beside her location log. By Friday, I had 6 separate data points confirming the same cycle. Her gas station purchases increased slightly, matching the distance covered. Even the timestamps from her smartwatch activity log went blank during those 2 hours. She must have taken it off each time, likely before going inside the hotel. At night, I cross-checked everything again: maps, transactions, text history. The pattern was solid with no gaps. I avoided assumptions and stuck to proof. The next week, I tested something different. I called her office at 12:30 p.m., pretending I needed to drop off lunch. Her assistant answered and said she'd already gone out with the client. I thanked her and hung up. The voice was relaxed, casual, and certain. No suspicion at all. I saved the number, logged the call, and waited. She came home later that evening, saying the day had been long. I nodded, asked nothing, and noted her mileage again. 11 miles more than normal. Consistent as always. By the end of the second week, there was no doubt. The same location, same time, same person. She even started dressing differently. Subtle changes, new perfume, lighter makeup. Nothing random. It was a schedule disguised as routine. I printed all the logs into a single document and added a cover page with dates and sources. It read like a report, not a story. Every point linked clearly to evidence. The plan wasn't about anger anymore. It was about process. The next step was finding where the professional line crossed the personal one. Proof of company misuse. That was the line I planned to use. If this were you, would you act or wait? I spent the next few days turning suspicion into structured evidence. Each night after she slept, I exported her bank activity into a spreadsheet. Lunch hour transactions aligned with the hotel's merchant code. I highlighted every entry that matched the same 2-hour window between noon and 2. Her expenses looked small: coffee, lunch, parking, but they carried identical timestamps week after week. I downloaded her company's employee handbook from the public HR portal. Section 4.2 covered conduct, time reporting, and use of company assets. Any personal activity during paid hours counted as time theft. That phrase, time theft, was what I needed. On Wednesday, I called a former coworker who worked in corporate compliance. I asked general questions about how anonymous reports were handled. He said evidence needed to be time-stamped, factual, and linked to company resources. Personal opinion or emotional claims were ignored. I thanked him and wrote down his advice. That evening, I added metadata to every photo and file: date, time, GPS coordinates, and brief labels. I stored duplicates on 2 cloud accounts with private links. The documentation looked like a small investigation file. Organized, factual, complete. The next step was access. I borrowed her work badge one weekend while she was showering. Using a simple magnetic reader, I copied the badge number and cross-checked it through the public building access log available to staff for safety transparency. Each entry listed door ID, time, and employee number. Her badge always logged out between 11:55 and 12:03, then back in around 1:55. The pattern had 0 exceptions over 15 working days. I took screenshots of the public log using her ID number as reference. It was perfect alignment. To confirm Mark's involvement, I reviewed his LinkedIn profile and email address from a company event post she'd shared months earlier. I compared his calendar availability using the shared meeting link she had once shown me. The 2 recurring vendor coordination blocks appeared on both schedules. Identical subject lines, same times. I took another screenshot. At that point, I didn't need confrontation. I needed confirmation from systems, not people. I created a small folder labeled Workplace Overlap. Inside, I kept files named sequentially: camera1.jpg, cardlog2.png, access3.pdf, receipt40.jp. Each showed a fragment of a single routine that would be impossible to deny. I avoided emotional notes, keeping everything objective. She kept giving me more material without realizing it. Her phone once synced to our shared drive automatically, uploading photos from her camera roll. Among them was a restaurant receipt from the hotel restaurant. 2 meals, same day, 12:43 p.m. The server name matched the previous receipt she paid for in cash. That was final confirmation. At home, she behaved as if nothing changed. Small talk, shared meals, weekend errands. I answered normally, maintaining rhythm. The goal was to reach the point where exposure would handle itself through structure, not emotion. By Friday, I had organized all materials into a single binder. I printed her weekly timesheets, showing client coordination, listed during every lunch break. Each was digitally signed. I didn't alter anything. I only mirrored what existed. The contrast between her records and physical evidence was already enough. The last step of the investigation phase was documenting company property misuse. She drove her assigned vehicle during those hours. The GPS from her phone matched the car's route logs. Both pointed to the same location. That detail alone converted suspicion into corporate evidence. I labeled the section Asset Misuse, printed it, and slid it behind the conduct divider. That night, she talked about a potential promotion, something involving a new regional account. She seemed confident, certain that her work performance was strong. I listened quietly, marking the date. If everything went as planned, her next company meeting would handle the exposure without my presence. The report built itself once the data was complete. I reviewed every document twice, ensuring no personal comments or assumptions. Only verifiable timestamps and sources. On Monday morning, I logged into her company's public compliance portal using a temporary account created under my initials. The system allowed anonymous uploads for ethics violations. I attached the compiled PDF, totaling 41 pages. It included photos, mileage logs, card receipts, access entries, and cross-matched calendars between her and Mark. The submission required a short summary. I wrote, "Possible conduct and time misuse during paid hours involving 2 employees, cross-verified with company assets and calendar data." Then I clicked Submit. The confirmation number appeared on screen. I saved a screenshot and closed the browser. 2 days later, her office routine shifted slightly. She left for work early, mentioning a meeting at headquarters. At 10:20 a.m., she texted that it might be a long day. I didn't reply. Around noon, her car's GPS tracker showed her still at the main office instead of the hotel zone. At 3:15 p.m., the tracker stopped moving for nearly an hour. When she came home that night, she looked neutral, maybe tired. She said the meeting had been about process reviews. I nodded and made coffee. She didn't talk much afterward. The next morning, she left her laptop open on the counter while getting ready. An internal memo was visible on the screen. The subject line read, "Compliance Review, Private Scheduling." The recipients were her, Mark, and 2 HR managers. I didn't scroll, just memorized the wording. Later that day, I checked the tracker again. Her car remained parked at the office for 8 continuous hours. That pattern continued for 3 days straight. No detours, no irregular routes. Friday arrived with another small change. She called me at noon, saying her afternoon meeting had been canceled and she'd be home early. When she arrived, she seemed focused, quiet. She placed her bag down, said she needed to rest, and went straight to the bedroom. At dinner, she mentioned that someone had filed a report to compliance about lunch breaks. I asked what that meant. She said they were investigating misuse of company time. Her tone stayed professional, no details offered. I just nodded. Over the weekend, emails came from her HR department, reminding all employees about ethics policies and personal conduct during paid hours. She didn't mention them, but I saw the notifications on her phone lock screen. On Sunday night, she checked her laptop several times, scanning folders. I noticed she deleted her vendor coordination calendar blocks. Then she ran an update and shut the lid. Nothing else was said. Monday brought visible change. At 9:35 a.m., the compliance department updated their portal with a note. Case escalated for policy validation. I refreshed it twice, then stopped checking. At 11:02, her car GPS pinged once from the office, then didn't move again. At 1:18, it sent one last signal near a downtown hotel parking lot. 30 minutes later, it returned to the office. By evening, she looked unsettled but calm. She said there had been questions from HR about inconsistencies. She didn't specify further. I didn't ask. That night, she received an email with a meeting request titled Follow-up Discussion, Ethics Audit. She accepted it instantly. 2 days later, she left home dressed formally, earlier than usual. By noon, I received an automated text from the GPS tracker. Her car was stationary at headquarters. Around 4 p.m., she texted that she'd be late. When she finally came home, she went straight to the living room, sat down and said, "Someone reported us." She didn't elaborate on us, but it was clear. Her tone was flat. I didn't respond. She said there would be an internal announcement the next day about restructuring. Her voice was controlled, almost rehearsed. I simply nodded and turned off the television. The line between discovery and exposure had finally met. Everything after that would unfold on its own schedule. I spent the next morning organizing the second phase. The exposure was moving through internal channels, but I wanted it to complete without interference. My plan was built on timing, documentation, and the company's own systems. I reviewed their code of conduct again, focusing on sections about misuse of assets and non-disclosure breaches. Both had mandatory investigation protocols. That meant once compliance validated evidence, it had to proceed through HR and legal automatically. No discretion, no silence. I wasn't planning to speak to anyone. The process would handle itself. I opened a new email draft using a clean address with no connection to my name. In the subject line, I wrote, "Supporting documentation, ongoing ethics review." I attached a redacted version of my report, leaving out personal identifiers. It listed the vehicle tracker data, time logs, and screenshots of calendar overlaps between the 2 employees. The message contained one sentence: additional data verifying previously submitted case. I scheduled it for delayed delivery, set to send on Thursday morning, 1 hour before the company's all-staff quarterly meeting. That meeting was always recorded and attended by department heads. If the timing aligned, the review would surface internally right before the broadcast. On Wednesday night, she seemed restless. She mentioned rumors about compliance audits, that management might suspend certain accounts during verification. I nodded and kept my attention on the news. She scrolled her phone for a long time, then said quietly, "People are talking about us." I didn't answer. She waited, then went upstairs. I stayed downstairs, setting one more layer in motion. I uploaded copies of the evidence folder to an encrypted sharing platform. I generated a view-only link and attached it to a plain text document labeled Vendor Coordination, Time Audit. That document included only neutral bullet points, names, dates, duration, mileage. I set the share setting to anyone with the link and created a trigger email set to deliver automatically if my primary address remained inactive for 48 hours. It wasn't about threat, it was redundancy. I wanted the outcome independent of my actions. The next morning, I left home before her. I parked near the company headquarters and waited. Employees streamed in slowly, carrying coffee and folders. At 8:53 a.m., she arrived with Mark. They didn't speak much walking inside. Both looked distant. I stayed until the meeting started at 10. Around 10:42, an alert appeared in my inbox, confirming that my scheduled email had been opened by compliance staff. That was enough confirmation. I turned off the tracker on my phone and drove home. At noon, a message appeared on the public company newsfeed announcing an internal compliance audit in progress. I refreshed the page again 30 minutes later. It had been updated with a note. Certain employees temporarily relieved of duties pending review. I closed the browser and left it there. She returned home late that night, quiet but collected. She said HR had questions about overlapping records and that Mark had been asked to step out during the meeting. I only listened. She mentioned that the issue might be a misunderstanding, but her tone lacked confidence. She went upstairs and stayed there. By Friday, the story had started circulating among her coworkers. Someone had posted on the company intranet about ethics violations linked to client coordination schedules. No names, but everyone could connect the pattern. The department calendar showed 2 blank spaces where her and Mark's names used to be. At lunch, she called me from her car and said, "It's over." I asked what that meant. She said compliance had taken her laptop, badge, and phone for review. I thanked her for telling me. The call ended after 10 seconds. That evening, I backed up the final copy of my report, now verified by official action. The revenge wasn't emotional, it was procedural. Every system she relied on to hide the affair was now the system exposing it. I hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't made a single threat. I just aligned evidence with policy and let timing do the rest. Would you call this revenge or justice? The compliance process moved faster than I expected. On Monday morning, her company's internal portal posted a notice about ethics and conduct updates. I knew what it meant. By 9:10 a.m., my phone showed her company vehicle parked at headquarters. It didn't move for hours. Around 11:45, a live-streamed internal town hall began. Employees could comment anonymously, and public questions scrolled across the screen. 10 minutes into the meeting, an HR director mentioned recent misuse of company assets and paid time. The camera stayed fixed on the stage, but the chat window filled with speculation. A moderator muted the comments soon after. The feed paused briefly, resumed, then continued without explanation. At 12:17, my tracker notification appeared again. Her car had left the parking lot and stopped briefly at a nearby cafe. Then it returned to the office. I checked social media. A few employees from her department had already posted vague remarks about Ethics Day and sudden exits. Nothing specific, just noise. But inside that noise, her story was spreading. She messaged me at 2:40 p.m. saying she'd be home late. I didn't respond. At 3:10, the compliance portal entry I had bookmarked earlier changed status to closed, action taken. I printed the page. When she came home that evening, she didn't greet me. She set her keys on the counter and said, "They know everything." Her tone was flat. I asked if she still had her job. She said HR had suspended her while they reviewed additional context. Mark's name came up once. She said he'd been escorted out after refusing to provide his laptop password. I didn't comment. She sat at the table for a long time without moving. Eventually, she went upstairs. The next morning, a brown envelope arrived at our mailbox addressed to her. The return logo showed her company name. She opened it silently, read the first page, and folded it back up. Then she said, "Termination pending final review." She placed the envelope on the counter and went outside. I left it there and made coffee. Over the next few days, small details surfaced publicly. Someone had leaked fragments of the audit summary online. It described repeated personal meetings during paid hours using company resources. The report included cross-verified GPS data and internal expense inconsistencies. Her initials weren't redacted. Neither were Mark's. I watched as co-workers commented indirectly under LinkedIn posts about integrity at work and trust in leadership. Every phrase sounded professional but carried weight. At home, silence replaced everything else. She stayed in the guest room, making calls and sending messages that ended without replies. One afternoon, I saw her type and delete a message to me 5 times before putting her phone face down. I didn't ask what she wanted to say. She began packing clothes 2 nights later. No conversation, no explanation. She said she'd stay with her sister for a while. I nodded and helped carry her bag to the door. 2 days after she left, her company released a formal internal memo confirming 2 dismissals related to the compliance audit. The document reached several local industry groups that shared best practice alerts. Her name appeared again, referenced as former employee. I downloaded the PDF and saved it beside the original evidence file. The circle was complete. That week, I received a message from an anonymous company address. "Thank you for your submission. Appropriate action has been taken." Nothing else. No signature, no details. I archived it. The revenge wasn't dramatic. It unfolded in minutes during a broadcast meeting that hundreds watched without realizing what they were witnessing. She had spent weeks pretending her actions were invisible. Now they were logged, archived, and distributed by the same systems that once protected her privacy. I drove past the hotel one last time on Friday. The parking lot was empty. The same camera still hung above the door. The reflection on the glass showed nothing but passing cars. That was enough. The fallout arrived in quiet stages. There was no confrontation, no public shouting, just consequences arriving through paperwork and silence. 2 days after her dismissal, an HR representative called to confirm she had returned her company equipment. I overheard the brief exchange. She said everything was dropped off and hung up without comment. By the end of the week, her company email had been deactivated, and her name was removed from the internal directory. I checked once, just to confirm. It was gone. Mark's situation became clearer through whispers from former colleagues. His termination letters cited misuse of company time and breach of conduct policy. He'd tried to claim the meetings were client-related, but the GPS data and hotel receipts contradicted that. He was denied severance and had his professional license flagged pending review. Within a few days, his social media accounts went private. Everything he'd built around that image of reliability collapsed in a predictable sequence. Meeting notes, access, reputation, income. At home, the air changed. She returned briefly to collect the rest of her belongings. No eye contact, no emotion, only logistics. She thanked me for not making things worse, her exact words. I nodded. She didn't realize the process had already done everything on its own. When she left, I locked the door and checked every room. No trace of her remained except a half-empty bottle of perfume in the bathroom cabinet. I threw it away. The legal side followed a clear path. My lawyer had already prepared the divorce documents. All I needed was her signature. When I emailed the papers, she replied within an hour, saying she'd review and respond. 2 days later, she signed electronically, without edits. The settlement was simple. No disputes, no appeals. She wanted closure fast, probably to move before any new background checks were required for future work. I changed all joint accounts, canceled cards, and updated my address on every platform. The utility companies processed the updates within 48 hours. I archived every piece of correspondence and labeled the folder Resolved. I didn't block her number. There was no reason to. But she never called again. A week later, I received her final text. I know you reported it. I understand. I didn't reply. There was nothing to discuss. The proof had been mechanical, not emotional. She had written her own outcome the moment she blurred the line between personal and professional. My involvement had simply aligned the data. The house grew quiet. No arguments, no explanations, just space. I rearranged the living room, took down photos, replaced them with blank frames for now. Every day started the same way. Coffee, silence, work. It was calm, organized, and stable. No need for revenge beyond what had already occurred. Weeks passed. News of the compliance case spread across the regional business circle. The incident was referenced in ethics workshops as a case study in data integrity. No names were spoken publicly, but the timeline was identical. She had become an anonymous example used to train others. I read about it once, recognized the phrasing, and closed the browser. The outcome was exactly balanced. No public drama, no confrontation, just accountability. I hadn't raised my voice or broken the law. I had only followed structure and proof until the system corrected itself. That was enough. By the end of the month, my life had adjusted. No messages, no reminders, no residue. Only the quiet precision of cause and effect. Every decision had led to this calm. I hadn't planned to destroy anything. I had only revealed what was already there. After everything settled, the house felt cleaner, quieter, and lighter. The documents were filed, the accounts were separated, and the noise had stopped. I didn't replay events or look for meaning. I treated it as a completed sequence. Discovery, confirmation, correction, closure. Nothing more. The evidence sat in a locked drive labeled Archive. I didn't open it again. It wasn't anger that kept it there. It was order. Some files exist only to remind you how patterns start and end. Weeks turned into months. She never contacted me again. Mutual friends stopped asking questions. People understood enough from what circulated inside her company. I didn't explain my side. There was nothing worth explaining. The facts were already public in the way that mattered, through verified reports and final decisions. The system had done what it was designed to do: correct misuse. I had only given it direction. I changed routine slowly. New route to work, Different grocery store, new gym. Every choice detached one more detail from the past. My phone calendar no longer carried her name. No shared lists, no reminders, no messages waiting to be read. Even silence can be organized when you decide to treat it like maintenance. I didn't delete photos. I just moved them to an offline folder titled Closed Year. It was accurate, not sentimental. The neighborhood stayed the same. People waved, asked polite questions, and moved on. To them, everything looked normal. That's how it should be. The most effective revenge never announces itself. It just corrects what went wrong and leaves the rest untouched. There was no satisfaction in her loss, only confirmation that deception has limits. Eventually, every system records what you feed into it. One evening, I drove by her old office. The company's logo had changed after a merger. The hotel nearby still stood, unchanged, quiet. A new cafe had opened across the street. I parked for a moment, then drove away without stopping. The past didn't need observation, it only needed distance. I spent weekends restoring an old motorcycle I'd bought years ago and never used. Mechanical work was easier than emotional repair. It either fit or it didn't. There were no lies in engines or torque values. Each part had a purpose, and when assembled correctly, it ran clean. I liked that. Looking back, I didn't see myself as a victim or a hero. I was just someone who followed patterns till they explained themselves. Betrayal didn't need rage to end. It needed verification. Once the facts aligned, everything else followed automatically: discipline, dismissal, divorce, and quiet. That was the full arc. If there was any lesson, it was this. Calm is stronger than confrontation. Evidence ends arguments faster than emotion ever could. Most people fail to see that revenge doesn't always look like payback. It sometimes looks like procedure finishing its course. I didn't destroy her life. She documented her own end, one lunch break at a time. I only kept the records. What would you have done differently? Comment your opinion below. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more real stories.